What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the THINKSPACE podcast. It's your girl, Summan Kandola, your host, and today is a very special podcast. I am actually going to be doing my very first solo cast with y'all today, and I had done a poll on my Instagram. What do y'all want to know? So y'all are saying, we want to know more about your story. And it's funny because this is actually something I get reflected on quite a bit. My peers will tell me, bro, I want to know more about you. I want to understand who are you, where are you coming from, what's informing your decision making. And as a Scorpio and a very private person, ironically, even though I'm chronically online, I don't really share a lot about my journey or who I am from a lens of like what really made me, what really brought me to this point in time to be living one of my dreams here with you right now, on camera, on podcast, in your ears, with you on your walk. So that's what we're gonna do today. So if you're ready, let's open up and get curious. Let's start with my name. So my name is Summandeep for full. I got harassed as a young person for my name being Summandeep. I think every brown kid who has a pre, a deep, a jeet on the end of their name gets harassed. It's almost like a coming of age thing that you get. And it took me a long time to actually fall in love with my name. It was later in life when I was doing work with one of my best friends, Aisha. She at the time had a company called Freed. And through that, she did a lot of advocacy work. She supported individuals in telling their story in a digital way where they got to take ownership of their story. Ironically, I'm sharing this on a podcast where I'm sharing my story and taking ownership of it. But through that experience, I had really learned that I started to refer to myself as Sue because it was like my Starbucks name. And it was an opportunity for me to just not have to get into the weeds of, oh, this is how you say my name, or that slight discomfort. And through that experience of just witnessing so many other people take ownership of their name, of who they are, of their story, of the crazy things that made them who they are, I was like, bro, I love my name. My one of my aunts, she was the one who named me, and she was actually a person who I have this very vivid memory from my childhood with. I don't know if you guys ever have these little glimmers from your past where you're just like, whoa, I was so present in that moment. And she was such a vibrant woman. I remember her coming and she was visiting. She was sleeping over the night. And you know when you're a kid and you just the kid takes the other kid by the arms and you just like swing each other around and you feel so in the moment and you feel so free? That was that moment. And I will always, always, always remember that woman because, well, my parents told me that she's the one who named me, but also because that moment felt like such freedom and it's just so ingrained in my spirit. And it shows up for me time and time again in my life. When I feel that sense of freedom, whether I'm on a road trip, or whether I'm going to a new cafe, or we're in a different country, or I'm meeting a new person and really getting deep for the first time, I feel that same sense of freedom. And so now I associate that sense of freedom, that sense of presence with my name. And that is how I fell in love with my name again. So I am from New Westminster. It's a little town in the Lower Mainland. I'm sure if y'all are from the Lower Mainland, you know about it. New West was very different back in the day. Right now, you have a lot of cool shops that are opening up on Columbia. Back in the day, the Columbia was a wild, wild west for us. We had, I believe, 8 elementary schools and 1 high school. And my mom always makes a joke. She's just like, you know, when you went to 8th grade, all your friends were white. And then 9th grade hit and everyone was a person of color. And I laugh about that all the time because the kids from Queensborough middle school, they all came up to the high school in 9th grade. And I remember having that feeling of just like, whoa, there's so many more people like me. Because in my elementary school, I was one of very few brown kids. Like I could name the brown kids. I won't because I'm not friends with them, but like I could name the brown kids in my school, less than 5, and everyone else was probably my cousin. And so I remember that feeling of all of these people of color, all these Filipinos, all these Indians coming to my school. And I was just like, oh my God, I felt so refreshed and I felt so united for the first time. And, there's a funny story that's percolating for me. I know this podcast has just dove right into it, but I don't know if y'all remember the story of meeting your childhood best friend. I definitely remember the story of meeting my childhood best friend. So my best friend from childhood, her name is Jessica, beautiful girl, beautiful woman. And she was not very nice to me when we first met each other, okay? When we first met, we were introduced by a mutual friend at the time, and she had said, yo, you should invite Sue to your birthday. And she was just like, no. Why would I invite her to my birthday? And she's like, well, like, we all know her. We all like her. Like, you should invite her to your birthday. And homegirl refused to invite me to her birthday. And a few weeks or something go by, and we end up walking the hallway, and we have one of our first conversations ever. And I think that the conversation was just, those moments where you feel like, oh my God, did I just meet somebody who understands me, who can know me, who can who I just want to live life with. And it was this instant relationship that just blossomed from that moment on. And I remember just being so appreciative of this person who had come into my world at that time and had just made it so much better. So that is the story how I met my childhood best friend in ninth grade. Still best friends to this day. Love her to death. But yeah, high school in New West was high school in New West. It's not something that I look back on, and I don't know, I'm not a high school person who looks back on high school like, oh my God, those were the best days of my life. Like, I look at life in a very different way. I feel like my life has just continued to unfold and continue to blossom open for me. And so in high school, did I have fun? Yes. Was I a young kid who had absolutely no emotional regulation skills, absolutely like the worst mindset, was incredibly depressed and was just really struggling? Yeah. I don't think a lot of people would know that though, because my vibe and my energy at the time was very like, let's go everywhere, let's do everything, and let's skip school and let's just go out. So I feel like high school for me was a point of just pure presence, and it was a lot of avoidance for what was actually starting to show up in my life. And this kind of makes me think about something else. And one thing you'll learn about whenever I do these solo casts is my mind will go into 10 different places, but I promise you we're still on the same road. I'm sure anyone who's listening to this podcast has had that moment where they really recognize my parents are just people, and you really realize like, yo, these are just people who are learning to live life for the first time ever, right? They're also just learning how to have a kid. They're just learning how to pay their bills and make it work. And my mom was 20 when she had me. My dad, I think he was 24, 25. So they were kids having kids. And I look at it now, like probably in the high school zone, I was really not taught or exposed to healthy emotional regulation. I wasn't exposed to healthy communication. I wasn't taught how to feel my feelings. And the reason I bring that up is as a coach, that's something that I teach quite a bit, right? That's something that I work on not only with myself, but with all of my clients, with all of, even in the production world, all of directing is peopling, you know what I mean? It's knowing how to support people, be people on screen so that we can help other people learn through these stories. And there was that, in that time in high school, that was a time where I think if I had intervention, I would have had a very different path. Now, I have a lot of peace with my path, right? My path is my path, and nothing too crazy happened on my path from a beautiful way. But I think at that time would have been a perfect time for me to have either had a big sister or to have gone to some courses or to have learned about mindfulness or different things. And that was actually the mindset that we're going to put a little pin in this, because that was something that had always stuck with me. And when I had my first entrepreneurial endeavor, that is the time in my life that I really thought about, because what ended up concluding from that was a lot of anger, was a lot of avoidance, a lot of shutdown energy, being around people who were not good for my soul or my spirit and were not true. I was in a position where I wanted to feel bad about myself. So I put myself around people who made me feel bad about myself. You know what I mean? It was this self-fulfilling prophecy at the time to be like, oh, you're a piece of shit. So I'm going to make sure that you have every single reminder under the sun to know that you're a piece of shit. And I think about that young girl quite a bit, and how I just love on her now, because love is never lost and it can always be translated. And I give her so much love and kindness. And yeah, I don't know if you're thinking about your younger self or what your relationship with your younger self, your teenage self was at that time. But I really do invite you to think about that, because so much work in the coaching world is like, let's think about our younger selves, and which is amazing. I mean, so much of the work that I do is with that younger self. But how much do we sit with that teenage version of ourselves, that version of ourselves who was trying to figure out who they are in the world? You know what I mean? And trying to be cool, trying to be noticed, trying to figure out their likes, trying to make money, trying to do their thing for the first time, trying to wear the clothes that they think that look fly on them, you know? And the more that we can find reverence and compassion for that person, I think we can tap back into their essence and their isness. You know, I shared that story earlier about that freedom and swinging. And I just think of that teenage girl, like, where did she really express that? I think she expressed it through, I was so artistic. I was loved fashion. I loved music. I loved being in the car and dancing. I loved experiencing things. And you know, if you look at the trend in your own life, you'll start to notice, like, how does my isness, the part of me that is so true to me, expand over time? And that's something I've been thinking a lot about lately, is how can I really understand how is that isness expressing and manifesting into my life right now? And whenever I feel like that part of me is very dim, that's when I don't feel too happy or excited about life. And I really encourage you to just reflect on that, because the more that I reflected on that, the more I was able to open up to that. Because I think in life either closes you or opens you. And sometimes in life you'll get, I'm getting closed up. And for me, the way that I get closed up is when that adventurous, serendipitous part of me starts to close. And ironically, one of my girlfriends actually just texted me. And I had a really tough time over the holidays because, as y'all know, I think I shared on here, I had a concussion. And so I was out of it, like, for 2 weeks, unable to leave my house. And I do not wish a concussion on anybody. And so my holidays were not bad, but they were not like, oh my God, it was amazing. And so she had messaged me. She was just like, yo, do you want to come with me to Victoria for one night? And like, I have a free hotel, like, it'll be such a blast. Like, you can kind of do your own thing for a little bit too. And there was that part of me that was like, I'm so closed right now and I have so much going on. And then I was like, just open, because, open. When beautiful things come into your life, that is life, God, universe, however you connect to your divinity and to the openness of life, that is life being like, hey, you want to play? Anyways, I digress. That was a big ass tangent, but hopefully y'all loved it a little bit. So after high school, that was when I started to really feel into a lot of that anger and that angst and, like, I don't know what's coming up next. So this is going back to kind of, that feeling of not feeling very guided. And there's a lot of peace in saying that. I think there's always like this internal desire to caveat everything. Like, I do not blame anybody for the fact that I felt a lack of direction. But I do know now from a sense of reflection is I did not feel like I had any direction at that time. And I remember someone had said to one of my friends at that time, like, oh, like, I don't really know what Sue's gonna do. And like, she doesn't really have any goals. And at the time, I think that kids who grow up in tough situations, what I've learned through trauma studies is that you don't really look to perceive the future because you're very focused on what is happening right now. How do I maneuver through today? How do I keep going? And at the time, I was very like, how do I just get to the next day, bro? You know what I mean? I was just very there. So that's the mindset that I'm in. And, you know, I am applying for schools and I want to go to UVic at the time. I applied for UVic. I was going to do a social work scholarship and I ended up getting a social work scholarship, which was amazing. And I wasn't able to actually go until I had done, I can't remember how it worked, to be honest. Maybe it was like I was missing a credit or something, but I had actually gone to Kwantlen for a few weeks. And Kwantlen is a local college, not a few weeks, I went for a couple months, which is a local college, kept me busy while I was waiting to go to UVic. And then I had said goodbye to a lot of my life here in Vancouver, and I had burned a house down and I had let go of very significant relationships that were really challenging for me at the time to release and let go of. And I listened to Beyonce, She Was Here, whatever that song is, and I ferried off to Victoria and I started a new life. And I would say that is one of the bravest things I ever did. You know, we take some of these everyday decisions and we minimize them and we're like, yo, like, oh, whatever, everybody leaves for college and university. But everyone doesn't leave for college and university. Everyone doesn't start in a new city knowing absolutely no one. You know what I mean? That is a very, very, very brave, self-trusty decision to make, to go and pursue a life that you have no idea what it can bring. And all you have is the idea of prosperity and the idea of expansion. And even though it may be the everyday miracle, it is still a miracle in your life. And who is to constitute what a miracle is and is not? And so at the time, I don't think that I had any understanding of like, oh my God, this is really brave. I kind of wanted to run away from my life. And I really just wanted to try something new. And so I went to UVic, which is on an island off of Vancouver. And I fell in love. Like I fell in love with the city. I fell in love with the lifestyle. I fell in love with what it was doing for me. I remember I was so lonely at the beginning. There was a Starbucks really close to the place that I was staying, the first house that I had. And I would go to the Starbucks every single morning. And the lady started to get to know my name. And she was like, oh, hey, Sue. Oh, hey, Sue. And I went there just for somebody to know me, just for somebody to notice me. And it was the easiest way for me to feel like I have some sense of connection. I'm such an extrovert and I just kept building on that. I'll never forget, one of my other best friends, I met her in my biopsych class. Another woman I met who was just such a beautiful, beautiful human in one of my other psych classes. And people would just kept building in my life. I had got a job super fast. And that job was actually a job for Future Shop. I don't know if I have OGs on here who are like, yeah, I remember Future Shop, but Future Shop was this electronics store. And this is important to the story of like, oh my God, interstellar vibes, how does everything become everything? So as a young kid, always loved cameras, making memories, like doing everything. Like my mom had a video camera and I loved it. She would have tape recorders and my cousin and I would record over her tapes. And I just loved multimedia so much. And so one of my homies, he had messaged me and he's just like, yo, I saw that you moved to Victoria. I actually work here. Do you want a job? I was like, yeah. And so I go and get this job and I'm in the camera department. And at the time, like I'm just a college kid, like a university kid who's just like, yeah, I'm living my life. Like I don't really, like I'm just working, you know what I mean? But it was such a monumental moment for me because it actually taught me so much about cameras and it taught me so much about selling because it was a commission-based job and I made great money for somebody who worked 2 days a week. And it was such a cool opportunity to do business with different people. You know, it was like, yo, if you give somebody the insurance, then you can figure out how to make that work for the deal. How can you negotiate with the client and then also negotiate with the company to give yourself the best opportunity? And, you know, some people would, for example, sell the camera that has more commission on it. And then whether it was what the person wanted or not. My approach was always, how do I sell you what you need so you don't return this? Because when people return an item, then you also lose your commission. And that was always my thing. Like, how do I give you exactly what you need so that you do not return this? Because once I make that money, I do not want to see a negative, you know? And it was the starting point of really loving the business side of sales, of service, actually, you know, like sales is service. Everything I do is in service. I coach in service. I produce in service. And it was that first opportunity for me to really recognize, like, what does service look like? What does service feel like? When does service piss me off? And when am I negotiating with what I want versus what others want? Like, there's so much when it comes to service-based businesses, because I find that the more you are aligned with yourself and the more that you can be in connection with why am I doing this and how can I serve, the process is so much easier. That being said, there's also a give and take, right? That's something that I learned big time when it comes to my coaching world is you have to also know, like, for what I am bringing to the table and the energy and everything that I'm bringing here, you have to always ensure that there's an exchange. Because when there's an exchange, the energy feels so much better. It feels like it is serving both parties. And I think those are the most beautiful partnerships to be in, is when it's serving both people. Okay, like I said, we're getting back on the main road, okay? So I'm in university, I'm working at Future Shop, and I am going to University of Victoria. I am taking psychology. I had done social work for a little bit, hated it, and I ended up moving into psych, loved it, loved psych. And, you know, I got all the way to my 4th year, and I had taken a psych marketing class. And I think consumer psychology. I had taken a consumer psychology class and it changed the trajectory of my life. It's that small moment again where you have no idea what the heck is happening, but whoa, this moment is shifting the game. And it was that moment where I was like, oh my God, why do people buy what they buy? Like, why are we attracted to what we're attracted to? And then how do we serve people? How do we get people to want things? And this is where my desires at Future Shop are also starting to melt with my desires here with psychology. And I made a silly decision now that I can look back at this years later. I actually left school and I dropped out, and I think at the time I was like, this is the best decision for me. And I was having a lot of difficulty with understanding what is the value of what I'm doing. This is costing me so much money. Like, how am I maneuvering through this? And I had tried to find guidance at the time. I had tried to find a therapist. And I remember just feeling like, you know, now I know that you got to test different people out, right? It's a people to people business. But at the time I was just like so jarred and so fresh that like anybody who felt so much like a threat didn't feel good to me. And the first therapist I had found, it wasn't a fit. It didn't serve me. And so I made the decision at that time to drop out of school. And I think at that time now was working for a different company, a telemarketer company. And I moved back to Vancouver. And so that decision was very layered. Maybe one day I will double click on it. There's lots of little nuances in there. Not just the decision to leave school, but everything that was happening in my life at the time. Of course, there's, heartbreak, all this other stuff where you're just like, okay, is this still where I want to live? And is this still an expansive place? And a place like Victoria, it's very small, right? And you have to kind of decide, I feel like, once you kind of creep up to about that 22, 24 age range, where it's like, well, do I want to live here and build a life here, or am I going to come back when I'm like 80? At least that's what it felt like for me at the time. And so I had decided to leave, and I came back to Vancouver. I grew up in US, lived in Burnaby, and then my family at the time had moved to Surrey. And so I was living in Surrey. And it was a tough transition. You live on your own for so long. I am so grateful that I had a home to go back to, that I had open doors and open arms to come back into this home. But you get very used to, like, this is how I, the individual, do things, moving out at 20 years old and then going back home 4 or 5 years later is a challenge. And so kudos to anyone who has done it, because I really believe once you have experienced more of yourself, it's really hard to go, quote unquote, back into spaces where you don't necessarily know how to be all of you in that space. So there may not be anything wrong with the space. It's just like, I now know what I as the individual like to do. So that best friend of mine that I made in high school, her and I end up moving out together. We go and we're living on Main Street. And that was, I would say, one of the best memories of my life, because I think everyone wishes and hopes that they have the opportunity to have the time with their friends in a way they'll never have it again. The more your life changes and shifts, you're going to have more and more responsibilities, and you're going to have responsibilities in different ways. You and your girlfriends aren't going to be able to go and buy like a liter of wine and get fucked up every night for the rest of your lives. And you also don't want to do that anymore. And you also find out that you had a sulfate allergy, and you don't realize that sulfates are all wine. Anyways, so we're here. We're living on our own. And then, I'm working for a telemarketer company, and same thing. There was a lot of expansion. This is a very big theme in my life. There's a lot of expansion. You're growing, and then you hit the ceiling. And I remember being at this telemarketing place, and there was a man, and he was talking, right? And he was just talking, and he was talking to nobody at the time. And what I mean by that is, like, that guy in the office who's just like always speaking, and no one's really necessarily engaging with him or her. And you're just like, what are you doing? Like, what is happening? And I remember that moment so clearly, because it made me look at the scenario so differently. I was in this office. I didn't want to be my boss. I didn't want to be my peers. I barely wanted to be in the role that I myself was in. And this is when I started to toy with my potential. I do not think before this time in my life, like before 25, I really thought about my potential. I thought about life like how, honestly, a very sheltered young person would think about life. I thought about it as like, okay, like life is, I'm just going to wake up one day and life is going to happen. I'm just going to wake up one day and I'm going to have 3 kids and I'm going to have a husband, and I'm just going to be happy, because I think that that is what happiness is. At least that's what has been modeled to me that happiness is. Obviously, that is not the trajectory of my life. Going through that space where I then started to have dreams, oh my God, it was intoxicating, I started to think like, whoa, like I'm actually pretty capable of things. I'm actually I'm pretty open to expanding, And I remember just thinking, okay, how am I going to maneuver? How am I going to do things? So that was a time in my life where I started to toy with the possibility of my potential. And so I had quit my job. I was still living with my best friend at the time. And looking back on it now, I was quite silly with the way that I moved through that season. Like, I was meditating all day. Like some days I was meditating like 4 to 6 hours a day. I was trying to look for work. I quit before I had another thing, and I was very impulsive. And I think I also at that time put so much pressure on the people around me to care for me, which was very unfair. And now as I move in my life, I feel so much compassion for that version of me because I just didn't know how to maneuver shifts and changes, which is another huge theme in my life. But you got to just give yourself grace, keep it fucking moving, apologize, and love on the people and appreciate the people for what they did for you at that time and the way that they showed up for you, because love sometimes feels like 90% I'm giving, 10% I'm getting. Sometimes I'm giving 10% and getting 90%, you know? So at that period of my life, I was getting 90%, and I was very, very appreciative of it. And I actually made the decision. My friend had decided, like, you know, she was getting married and she's like, I want to live at home before I get married. And so, you know, she leaves and I was like, okay, I'm going to move home. I sold my car. I sold everything that I had. And I was like, I'm going to rebuild myself from the inside out. And that is when my personal development journey really started. My mom had always been a part of like the spiritual world. So that was something I think that gave her a lot of structure and faith in a time that was very challenging and tough for her. And for me, I was very like, nah, deuces to it. And that was a time where I was starting to be like, okay, well, I'm feeling all of these different things. I'm meditating. I'm starting to get into this world through the desire for productivity. So how can I actually start to open this up? And that is actually where I'm going to stop my personal journey for today. I will continue my personal journey on my next solo cast, but that is a good point for us to stop because I want you guys to take this as an opportunity to reflect, right? When I wanted to start this session and I was like, yo, where am I going to start my journey? I wanted to start it when I met the team at Self Hired. But that was not the impetus of the magic of me, you know? And I think so many of us do not give ourselves enough credit or give life and divine enough credit for those little magical moments. Think of that person who sat beside you at a table and maybe just looked fabulous, and you looking at them and their fabulousness created something magical within you, created opportunity within you. And those are those small gear turning moments that really actually shift our life, that really actually make our lives what they are. And that big chunk of content that I just shared with you of like, yo, this is where my life started. This is essentially how I can look at my life now and be like, oh, like what were those magic moments? I would never have been able to do that without the work that I have done on just admiring the journey, you know, and listening to all these incredible human beings and guests that we have on the podcast, which I hope that you guys have been absolutely loving. But yeah, like the power of sharing your story and knowing your story is such a unique experience. So I really want to take this time to just also give you the opportunity to think back on your story and maybe take that with you into your day as you move through this day. Like, yo, when were those gear switching moments for me? And if I was to think on 3 gear switching moments for me before I even started what I was doing now, before I even started being in the life or the world that I'm in now, or becoming who I know I am now, what would those be? So take that with you, and thank you so much for listening to today's podcast. I am really, really pumped to be doing some solo casts. We're going to start with solo casts once a month. And depending on you guys, if you love them, then we'll do more. If you guys are like, Sue, I just want to hear the guests, then we will invite the guests. Regardless, I feel like this is a dream come true. And I just hope you know that you are truly participating in a dream come true for me. And I do not take it lightly. I deeply, deeply appreciate your time, your energy, your curiosity, and the fact that y'all showed up, because really you're showing up to this podcast so that you can reflect and think on your own life, right? That's why we make content. I will never forget when I really learned, like in psychology, how do you actually help people change? How you help people change is you give them the intrinsic desire to shift and change what is not working for them. How do we actually get to that intrinsic desire? We see ourselves through other people, through stories. And that is where my love for storytelling comes from. It is such a huge opportunity to learn about ourselves, to shift, to understand the world at greater depth and understand ourselves at a greater depth. So just remember that you putting yourself in the position to learn and grow and expand and reflect on like, who am I? Who am I not? Is one of the bravest things that you can ever do in your lifetime. So thank you. Without further ado, I will let y'all go, but please rate and review this podcast. If you love your girl at all, it would mean the world. It helps our podcast grow. It helps more and more people come to ThinkSpace, learn, think, and grow, open up and get curious. So please review, and I will see you in the next one.